Hello and welcome to The Actor and the Engineer. My name is Paul James. I am the actor.
And my name is Josh Knapp. I'm the broadcast engineer. So today we're going to talk about One Night in Miami, the directorial debut of Regina King, who we've talked about a bunch here. And I know this is a movie podcast. We haven't really talked about Regina King and Watchmen, but I think at some point we'll probably end up talking about her since you just recently watched it. But we're not really talking about her as an actress right now. We'll talk about this film and give a quick plot synopsis. It's kind of a fictionalized version of an actual night that happened in Miami after he was called Cassius Clay at the time, but would soon change his name to Muhammad Ali, beat Sonny Liston in a championship fight. And on that night, Malcolm X, Cassius Clay, Jim Brown, and Sam Cooke all were in Miami in a hotel room, and this movie is a somewhat fictionalized version of what happened that night. So yeah, it's an interesting premise, and it's based on a play written by Kemp Powers, and he also wrote the screenplay. And so it stars Kingsley Ben-Adir as Malcolm X, Eli Goree as Cassius Clay, Aldis Hodge, who we just saw recently in The Invisible Man, as Jim Brown, and Leslie Odom Jr. of Hamilton fame as Sam Cooke. So where do you want to start?
The idea of these four guys in a room together just hanging out is a concept in itself that at first you go, this never happened. Then you find out it did happen. And then everybody's like, well, it's speculation, their conversation. But what this movie does for me, it holds up to the possibility that these are the things that they talked about, because it is the evening that Cassius Clay won. It is the evening that Sam Cooke has to come to his reckoning about his career. Jim Brown, they're all on the precipice of something different than what's going on. They make it very clear what's going on with Malcolm X at the time. So they're all in these transitions. So the idea that these four guys were in a room together and having a conversation of just like football stats or whatever makes no sense to me. So there's a little bit of criticism behind this movie that how will we ever know what they talked about? It's not the point. The point is that if these four greats got into a room together, it was not about flowers and walking the dog. It was about something bigger. And I have to admit something. In the first 4 or 5 minutes of watching this, I thought I was not engaged. And I was like, what's happening here? Then I thought, well, is this like a biopic? It's one of those rock and roll biopics, which there's been a lot of great ones. What's Love Got to Do with It? Ray, Walk the Line, the Buddy Holly story, but they all kind of have a genre idea behind them that's sort of typical at this point. So I was like, is this what this is going to be? Because if it is, I don't know if I can engage in it. Then I realized very quickly, sometimes as an audience member, I forget I have to give myself over to what I'm watching, not the opposite way around. Instead of making the project engage me, I have to engage. I have to give myself over to it. And as soon as I realized that after Sam Cooke's performance in the beginning.
At the Copacabana?
Yeah. Okay. Somewhere in between that, I got blown away. And it had a profound effect on me. And I've admitted a million times before, I am a crier. I will cry at the drop of a hat. But I was not expecting to have those moments in this movie. I don't know why, but I just wasn't. And it smacked me hard. And it's not any kind of moment that I think I would have ever suspected. So overall, I think it's one of the best of the year. And I see why everybody's talking about this movie. And I've got a lot of great things to say about Regina King. Go figure. So yeah, I fell in love with this movie. I really did. And I have not stopped thinking about it.
Oh, wow. See, and for me, going into it, it seems like it's a difficult thing. First of all, it's a difficult premise to make engaging. Number one, it's based on a play. And so we've even recently talked about Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. We've talked about Fences in the past. We've talked about a couple of different films based on plays. And inherently, the subject matter may not be, and the settings may not be as dynamic as, I just rewatched like Fast and Furious 6. It's like, yeah, they're just like going all over the place. And it's like, there's visual things that you can pull from and something like that. Whereas in this, there have to be ways that you can make the filmmaking dynamic. And so it's a high bar to begin with. And I think to make it even more complex and more difficult is you've got four main characters. Now there's certain times when one character is focused on over the others. And I think those were the parts that I could see how Regina King was trying to manipulate the subject matter to make it more dynamic And there were times that I felt like it was difficult to balance those types of things. I mean, there's certain scenes, especially in the beginning, where she's got to introduce us to all these characters, and she's got to help us understand where they're coming from and where they're at the beginning of this titular night in Miami. And so it's kind of difficult. It seemed like there were certain ones that were easier than others. For some reason, there were times in this movie where it kind of took me out of it. And it wasn't necessarily the direction. I don't think it was just trying to translate this. I started to analyze how much of this is in the play and how much of this is framing devices for the movie. And I'll have to seek out the play, but I just watched it last night. But I think that overall, she has a good command on different shots, and it's really difficult to make a singular setting, and especially 4 people in a singular setting, dynamic filmically. It's a tough ask of somebody, especially for their first film. So I think the direction was solid, and I think the performances were great too. It's just I was trying to balance all of these things, and I don't know, it didn't hit me as hard because I was trying to like see the strings or trying to figure out how to manipulate those things. And also, I'm not as emotional as you when it comes to certain, to most movies. So yeah, that was
things.
That was the difficult part for me. Although there are some scenes that I think were really effective, and I'm sure we'll get into them soon.
Well, I've been thinking a lot about this because I knew this was going to be a topic, how to transpose a play into a movie. And you're right, we have talked a lot about that recently, and I've been thinking about it, and I'm wondering how much is that the responsibility of the filmmaker? Because the only difference between this film and movies that are written for one room, Rear Window, Breakfast Club, Free Fire, Rope, all take place in one room and written for the screen.
Even I'm thinking of Ending Themes that we just talked about this year. I mean, that's another one that has like 2 settings, essentially. 3 settings, right. I guess. And, it's got the car, the house, and the school, and that's it.
Well, and because the car is so confined that kind of doubles the stakes of it being one room and all the dialogue. And we actually talked about that in that movie. I think it's the amount of dialogue and the amount of character development and conflict in those small confined areas, not meaning the room, but in the scenes. There's so much dialogue and there's so much spoken that I think as a modern day audience, we're not used to that. I think it's because when we do have a movie set in one room, The Breakfast Club, let's use that as an example. It does not have Shakespearean dialogue. It does not have long monologues. It does not have these epic conversations. It has epic conversations, but just not like this. So I'm wondering how much is it our minds that will not transpose it for us? Because what I thought when I was watching One Night in Miami, I immediately thought, oh, I wonder if this was a play. And if it's not, it should be. I'm thinking they should have done the opposite if this was just made for the movies. So I can't tell whether or not I'm okay with it because I come from a theater background and I'm used to these long monologues from characters and these asides and people staring at audiences and speaking to the audience and speaking for, 4 or 5 minutes. And that's a long time to speak. And when you see a 4 or 5 minute monologue written out, it's long. And so I'm wondering how much is it us as a modern day audience who will not accept, I'm not saying that sounds like it's purposeful, but we've talked about this off podcast where I met somebody who was 22 years of age. I was doing a play and she said that she had a hard time focusing on anything longer than a half an hour. And I was like, what? And she said, well, if you think about it, my generation was raised on, half an hour shows on Netflix and the Disney Channel and all that other stuff. And I was like, so was mine. And she said, yeah, but we had instantaneous gratification where we could just switch at any moment. We didn't have to stay on that half an hour. We could go on. And I said, well, then how do you watch a play? Because if you're in the theater, you should be going to see plays. And she's like, it's really difficult for me to focus and I have to practice it. And I have to sit there and keep my mind focused on the play. So she has been
conditioned,
right, on some level. So I'm wondering how much of this is us as an audience member. We need to give ourselves over to it. And like I said at the beginning of the podcast, I was sort of not engaging in this because whatever. And I realized it was me not engaging not the opposite way around. So it's a curious question because the other thing that I noticed is there's so much going on in those dialogue scenes that it's almost like you can't possibly pick up on all of it at one time. And when you're in the theater and it's right in front of you, that's all you have is the words and the actor and your ears. That's all you have. You don't have anything else going on. And I think some of the directing choices and the techniques that Regina King uses were quite brilliant in eclipsing that issue for me. And I noticed it halfway through the film, some of the things that she did. And I was like, that's a really smart way to do that, because in theater, you are the fourth wall. But in a movie, you can break the fourth wall because there is no fourth wall, technically. That said, being a theater person, this is the type of movie that I probably would have come back to later on just to watch again because of the rich dialogue and because of the character studies. And these 4 actors do a spectacular job. And, you know, 2 of them had really difficult jobs. Eli Goree and Kingsley Ben-Adir have really difficult jobs. Not that we don't know who Sam Cooke and Jim Brown are, but there are not stereotypical versions of these people, if you will. They are not as imitatable as Cassius Clay and Malcolm X. Cassius Clay in particular has a very nuanced cadence, and his energy is very him. And to do that without it being a stereotype is unbelievably difficult, or caricature. And then to play Malcolm X and or Cassius Clay after Denzel Washington and Will Smith both got Oscar nominations for playing these 2 characters, and being able to bring something different to it was mind-numbing to me. I was blown away by it. And so whatever Regina King brought to it, you know how they say when somebody cooks with love, you know how they say that there's love in there. That's why it tastes so good. You can sense and feel when somebody makes a passion project, a movie that has their heart in it. And I can feel Regina King's heart in this film. So I think it's going to be a love fest for me. And I will admit, in the first 4 minutes, I thought I was going to pull out and be like, I'm really not into this, but it smacked me around.
Well, I think those were the parts that those first 4 minutes were the parts that didn't work as well for me. But once they all get together, the way that each of these guys are dealing with life and dealing with the civil rights movement and dealing with just being minorities, being African Americans in 1964, and how it's not monolithic. It's not each one of them have the same exact experience. And it's not like each one of them are expecting the same things out of different people. And so that to me was the most interesting thing. And having them be able to have discussions back and forth. And they weren't really talking about necessarily like white people and what white people were doing. They were talking about what they were doing and what their community, especially Malcolm X, what he was looking to do moving forward, and his conflict with Elijah Muhammad, and then also Jim Brown and his transition into a new career potentially at this point. He'd only shot 1 movie when this movie takes place. So he's in a kind of an interesting situation where he's trying to figure out, where he's going to fit in and what he's going to do going forward. Sam Cooke is already essentially the most self-sufficient person. And they bring this up. He's the only one who's not getting a paycheck from somebody. So yeah, there's these crossroads, and they're kind of all working through different things. And that's what was interesting to me, is it's not that there's like some sort of like centralized version of what each of these guys is going through. And we know enough about them. Maybe that's it. Maybe I was just hoping that there was a way to get into the situation without having to give the preamble for each of the characters, because it seemed a little bit like delaying the inevitable of let's get all these guys into a room and have them work stuff out. It seemed like there was enough backstory for some and then not enough backstory for others at the beginning. And then there were certain scenes for example, in the middle of the film, there's a story that Malcolm X tells about Sam Cooke, which is beautifully done. And it is a perfect way to break up the dynamic between all the people and to break up just us being in a room with them. And I was looking for more kind of like quote unquote cut scenes or something like that. Maybe I don't know, but it seemed like that was just full of purpose and purpose and character for both of the people involved, Malcolm X and Sam Cooke. And then the other things, I don't know, things at the beginning just seemed a little off. I don't know. Do you feel like your sense of tone or your sense of the movie changed at the fight, or Like when they were all kind of that night?
Yeah, I think you're right, because I was in fear of it being biopic-y. And I have no problem with that genre. I like that genre. I just mentioned 4 or 5 films that I think are spectacular in that genre. Won a bunch of people Oscars. Put people like, I can't think of who played Buddy Holly now.
Gary Busey.
Yes, thank you. I was going to say Gary Newman for some reason. I don't know why.
Well, he was in Cars, so,
Yeah, there you go. Gary Busey has an Oscar nomination for playing Buddy Holly. And sometimes when you're fictionalizing a reality, it comes across fictionalized. It comes across glossy. There's no realism to it because you're using large brushstrokes to show you what happened the night Cassius Clay won, what happened to Jim Brown when he speaks with Beau Bridges, what's going on with Malcolm X. And I think that the reason why the Malcolm X thing rings a little truer is because I know more about that character and that person in general.
From the biopic that Spike Lee directed that Denzel Washington, or just other things that you've read? And
all of the above. I was on a bus and I was going home from work. It was like 1986, 87. And I was working in a record store, which tells you something about the time. And there was a guy reading the Malcolm X autobiography. And I can't remember if he worked there or if he worked in the mall, but we had kind of like a speaking relationship because he would sit at the bus stop. And I said, "What are you reading?" And there was this atmosphere about me asking about it that made me cautious, but at the same time curious, because I thought I didn't really understand why he was being so seemingly standoffish about it. But I think it was probably one of those situations where a black guy's being asked by a white guy something that the white guy probably should already know. And the fact that the white guy doesn't know that is probably troublesome to the black guy. I think that he was giving me the vibe of, dude, it's not my responsibility to explain this stuff to you. Not in a defensive way. I mean, I'd heard and I didn't get offended by it. I immediately started to research and I started reading newspaper articles about Malcolm X, and the way and the tone about how they described Malcolm X in the papers disturbed me because they talked about him being light-skinned and have red hair, and they didn't call him a terrorist, but they called him something that was like that. Militant. That's exactly the word that they used. And I just was like, well, what is going on here? So I picked up the autobiography and I read it. And then Spike Lee did the movie, and I couldn't get over how much Spike Lee was able to put that book onto screen. And there's a shot in that movie where the KKK went to burn down, I believe, Malcolm X's childhood home. Don't quote me on that. And there's a scene where they're riding on horseback, the KKK, over a hill, and there's a big full moon. And that's literally described like that in the book. So I was overwhelmed by somebody who could make a movie and see it and present it exactly how I saw it when I read it. So that's how that came to be. And I was blown away. And of course, I'm a big Spike Lee fan at that point anyway. So that's probably why I know more about Malcolm X than all 4 of these guys probably put together. But I also didn't know how much of Sam Cooke's music that I knew until I just went on YouTube and just started listening. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. I love this song. You got to be kidding me. I love this song. But Sam Cooke didn't come to me like most people with Change Is Gonna Come. I heard Tina Turner do that song first. Well, seemingly first. And then I was like, wait, this sounds familiar. I know it's not her song. So I investigated and I realized, oh yeah, I do know that Sam Cooke song. I just didn't realize I couldn't have put his name to the song, if you will.
I think that the other thing that is that we have to look at is that we've got a lot more access to the words that Malcolm X and Cassius Clay have said, because they were just in the press in a different way than Sam Cooke and Jim Brown were. You know, Jim Brown's a NFL player at the time, and he's not necessarily like giving huge speeches. And Cassius Clay is just an otherworldly, amazing boxer who has the mouth to say things that are outlandish, and he's got the talent to back it up. So that right there is just, I mean, that just prints newspapers back then, I'm sure. So they're going to ask him to talk as long as he wants. And with Malcolm X, I mean, that is literally what he did. I mean, that was what he was, is that he was a large part of the Nation of Islam, and and was someone who got people together, and his words were his vocation. So yeah, I mean, there's a much easier on-ramp for those two characters than for Sam Cooke and for Jim Brown. So yeah, I don't know, but the Sam Cooke character really did interest me, and having that kind of an angle on, he's a business owner, and there's different ways to look at something like that. He's working within a predominantly white industry, but he's trying to make something on his own and have control over the things that he's creating, and be able to push people forward that he believes are valuable and are talented, and might not have gotten as much of a fair shake, or might not have gotten an opportunity if not for his company, even though it's within this industry that is at that time especially was predatory to African Americans, or would even co-opt African American music. But I loved the story that I didn't know that, but the story that he told in there, where Bobby Womack wrote a song and they sang it and released it, and it got up to 94 on the Billboard Top 100, and then they licensed it to the Rolling Stones and it got to number 1. And it's like, when he got the royalty check, it's like, this is how you do it. You're utilizing all the tools that are in front of you to be successful. And I think that's a big difference between the Malcolm X character in this film and Sam Cooke character in this film, is that, Malcolm X obviously just wants to not play the game. He's very, segregationist and, anti-integration, and, we're going to do our own thing over here. So yeah, and it's a different thing. So it's interesting to see those all on the same screen.
Real quick, back to reading the papers about Malcolm X, because I went to the library, and the thing that made me upset was they were trying to make me afraid of this historical figure in these articles. They never presented him as a man, and I'm thinking, he's got a big, huge autobiography. He's got to have something other than just being like what they're presenting him to be in the paper. So that pissed me off, because I don't like when they present one image of somebody and that's the image that I'm supposed to take. Now, if that's the image that I took after I read the autobiography, or after I read all the stuff that I could read, then that would be the image that I took. But the fact that they were presenting it that way, I knew instinctually something was wrong about that. And I thought, I've got to figure that out. So that's another reason why I kind of catapulted myself down that rabbit hole. And I'm glad that I did. As for the Sam Cooke thing, what I find interesting about that is that it's not that Malcolm X has a problem with Sam Cooke, at least from this movie, from what we can see, making money and owning his own rights to his music, which was huge, and still even to this day is huge, that you own your own rights. It's that he needs it to be something more than just that. Malcolm X needs this guy to do something more than just be a businessman in this white world and figuring out how to take a 94 to a number 1. Because he even says the guy who wrote the song was a little pissed off about that. And then he got his first royalty check and he was like, yeah, no, I'm good. This is, oh, wow. So this is how you make money. I think Malcolm X's problem with that is, from my perception of watching the movie, is not necessarily that that's a bad thing. It's that with the voice, finger quotes, that Sam Cooke has, it can be something deeper than just that. It has to be, he has to make a statement. He has to put his thumbprint on it.
He's kind of said, you've developed this bullhorn, but you're not talking through it.
Right. And if anybody knows anything about Sam Cooke and the song, that's coming. Yep. And so it's this kind of wink, wink. I'm in on not the joke, but I'm in on what's happening. And so I knew it was coming, and it excited me because I know that song very well. That song is powerful. And so then, him saying this is what Bob Dylan is doing, he's doing what you should be doing. How come this white guy is doing what you should be doing? But in the end, it's the Sam Cooke song that touches my soul. I'm a Dylan fan. I don't have a problem. I don't have a problem with Dylan. I like him, but the Sam Cooke song crushes me. No matter who does a version of it, it crushes me. So yeah, it's amazing to me not only that these 4 men have the uber amount of talent that they have, but they also want to do more with their lives. They want their lives to mean more than just being successful at their talent.
They have ambition. Yeah, ambition past just their vocations. So, I mean, I guess Malcolm X's vocation is his ambition, but the other ones too, they could totally just, like you said, phone it in. But one place where this film, and I'm sure the play, diverges from real life is that Sam Cooke did write Change is Gonna Come before the Bob Dylan song even came out. But it hadn't been released, I guess, at that point. But still, it's not that directly, Bob. It's not a Beach Boys Beatles situation where it's like tit for tat, or these people heard this and they make that, and then that influences. It was in tandem that where they were both coming out with protest type songs, or at least social justice type songs. But yeah, so that's an interesting kind of little wrinkle, but it makes the film work better, and I don't have a problem with
dramatic license.
Yeah, much in the same way that like you're right, we can't tell exactly every single word that these guys said in this room. So, but that would be dumb and boring if people were having to vet every word.
It's about the point that Malcolm X makes about that.
Sure, of course.
That's what it's about. It's not about it's not about the chronological order of what is released, although that's interesting that they kind of manipulated that, but still it's about the point of that.
Regina King and the screenwriter, they didn't go in there and they didn't say like, he storms out of the room and then like goes and picks up a notepad and starts writing down the lyrics for, it's not that direct. That would be a little bit, okay, we get it.
Yeah. Sam Cooke goes to bathroom. Malcolm X screams, change is going to come. I mean, come on. Yeah. It's handled really well. So, so be it. I always think of JFK when they talk about fictionalizing movies about people who actually existed in this world. It's first of all a movie. It's an interpretation of events from people's perspective, not a documentary. So if this was a documentary about these four guys doing this and they messed with the facts, that would bother me.
Well, and I think it's more, like you said, it's more powerful. And then if it were a documentary, we wouldn't be able to like experience the scene where Malcolm X is watching Sam Cooke on stage and the whole sound system goes out because Jackie Wilson pulls the mic and then all the band runs off. And it's like, first of all, I don't even know if that's real, but like, dang, if that was real, like seriously, you need to get another band. But just the way that he's able to command the crowd and the way that he's able to kind of like let that fear soak in and then just push back on it, and then is able to command that crowd and get them to start singing the grunts and Chain Gang. And then, so well done. Oh my gosh. And then the other thing is that you not only get to see Sam Cooke's, his demeanor change, you get to see Malcolm X's demeanor change. You get to see that shift in like, I thought this guy was something, but he's just another singer, to, whoa, this guy is something. This guy can do what I can do, but in a different way. And of course, it's one of those, for me at least, any scene that incorporates some sort of diegetic music or, people performing or whatever. And we talked about it in Sound of Music. And I just love how you're able to use music to modify emotions. And that really gets to me a lot more than somebody just like saying a monologue. Like that doesn't necessarily do it for me. I'm sure it does for you, but it's not as fun for me as somebody, singing. So
well, first of all, you said Sound of Music, which I think is really cute. You meant Sound of Metal.
Oh my
I think
gosh,
that's adorable.
Could you imagine Julie Andrews just like shredding on the drums?
Yes, actually, I can. Yes,
she's probably healthy enough to do it. Yeah.
Strangely enough, that moment is the first profound moment I had in the film where I started to weep openly. And the way that Regina King handles that crowd scene where she comes up and over and Malcolm X is like, by time, you couldn't hear the lyrics from where I was standing, but you could feel it. And as she's coming over the crowd and his vocal kind of goes down lower and lower and lower. And then when you get to Malcolm X, you can see he's just reveling in the power of what's happening and this look that comes over his face. Normally I can sense when it's coming. I can feel it in my eyes, of course, and I can feel it in the back of my throat. But for whatever reason, this is why One Night in Miami is going to be on my top 10 list this year, is because I did not see the profound moments coming. And I was openly weeping before I even realized I was doing it. And to me, that was an experience that I don't have that often. And how she did that to me, I will never understand. But that was the first time that it happened in the film. And you're right. That moment is, and I think that once again, it's probably dramatic license because no band would probably leave the stage, especially a bass player. I mean, a bass player would try to or a guitar player would try to do something. Drummer could do something, you could hear the drummer. And it's just dramatic license. It would be less dramatic if the band stayed and tried to do an acoustic set. So it's all done for movie moments, but man, is it powerful. It is well done.
Yeah. There's a couple of scenes that did stand out for me. I mean, that's obviously one of them. But the other scene that I thought was really interesting, I mean, subject matter wise, was when I think it was when Jim Brown and Malcolm X were in the room together. It was when Cassius Clay runs out to find Sam Cooke after the Bob Dylan scene. But they're sitting there talking in the kitchenette area about the different skin colors within the African-American community. And that's something that I didn't really know much about, but it was interesting that there's definitely a dynamic that's set up or can be set up between people within the African-American community based on your skin pigment, the darkness of your skin. And that's something that a movie like this, which is super accessible, it's on Amazon Prime. I mean, it's bringing up things that I hadn't thought about. But I was just reading recently Sundance Film Festival is going on or has been going on over the last few days. And one of the films that is at the Sundance Film Festival is Passing, which is Rebecca Hall's, I don't know if she's directed before, but she's the actress Rebecca Hall. She's written and directed a movie called Passing, which stars Tessa Thompson and Ruth Negga, both playing African-American women who are, to some extent, one of them, Ruth Negga, is passing as a white woman, married to a white man. And Ruth Negga grew up with Tessa Thompson, who also is light-skinned, but has embraced her African heritage and is not trying to pass as a white woman. And so, but it's about their relationship later on in life. And so it sounds really interesting, but once again, I was just kind of like, wow, that is an interesting synchronicity that just watching this movie and then hearing about this new film, Passing. So I don't know, it sounds interesting, and it sounds like it's a complex issue.
Well, going back to reading the Malcolm X autobiography, in that autobiography, they talk about how Malcolm X is lighter skinned and he's got reddish toned hair. And there's a lot of terminology for that's really uber offensive. I keep saying uber tonight, sorry. But he was actually treated differently in his family. His actual immediate family treated him better and kinder because he was lighter skinned. Wow. So that is a thing. Yeah. And it's interesting because I never like to relate any kind of struggle that I have to somebody else's struggle, because I don't want to take away the power that their struggle has affected an individual's life. But I can kind of relate to it because in the gay world, there's straight acting and all of these terminologies where, one, I don't really understand that term, but I guess it's a gay guy who acts more like a straight guy, and that's supposedly more appealing. I don't really understand it.
So would that be considered passing? That would be considered passing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, 100%. That's a great way to put it. I used to call it blending, that I could blend into the world. And until something came up, or until I revealed something that made it obvious, or until I actually spoke about it, I could blend into the world. And that leads a very interesting perspective, because you hear and are privy to things that most people aren't, because they think you're something that you're not. And so I've heard some conversations where I've been like, yeah, I'm not good with any of that. You're not. Nope, I'm not doing that. I'll tell you a real quick story. I just started a job. I don't even remember the job. I don't even remember when it was or where it was at. And the manager was an African-American woman, and she was in her middle 30s. And a guy walked in and started asking me questions on my first day. And I remember it was behind a counter, so it's probably some kind of food industry job. And I was like, that sounds like a manager question. She's the manager. And he kept talking to me through me to her. And so, see, I'm obnoxious. I just turned and walked away. Like, I don't know what I actually got reprimanded for that, actually. And I understand why, because you still want to be professional, you still want to be polite, you still want to be businesslike. And he was a customer. I didn't get reprimanded. It just was told that I should have handled it differently. But I was trying to get him to understand, I'm not the manager. This is my first day. She's the manager, but he will not accept it for what it was. So he literally wanted to ask me a question, and I had to ask her a question and get a response. And I was like, I'm not doing that. I'm not 5 years old and my parents aren't getting divorced. I'm not doing that. So it does exist. And there's a movie out there called Imitation of Life. It's been done 3 times already, I believe. And it is about a young African-American woman who passes as a white girl, and no one believes that this black woman is her mother. And she denies her most of her life. young African-American girl who passes as white denies her mother throughout the entire movie. And then without giving too much away, that comes back to bite her in the butt big time. And so, yeah, I'm very aware that inside one's own group, there are still
subgroups.
Yeah. And that's another thing. That's why those articles pissed me off about Malcolm X, because they kept describing him as, well, they were using a couple terms that are completely offensive nowadays, but they were lighter skin, red flecks in his beard, and his goatee wearing militant. And I was like, wait, because he has a goatee, he's a militant? What are you I just knew something was wrong about the way they were describing this man. I just knew it. I had no political views towards him, or I didn't understand anything about him at the time. And I certainly don't really have that many political views about what he stood for at this point in my life. But I just knew that was wrong.
Yeah, I mean, we can get into politics, I guess, but I'm looking at him as a character in this film, and as a character in this film who's at, like the other guys, who's at a precipice and needs to make a decision one way or the other, and is kind of like putting all of his chips on Cassius Clay / Muhammad Ali following him. And you come to find out, reading that didn't really happen after this, but at this exact moment they were still friends, and he was trying to lean on Cassius Clay as a friend, but then also trying to utilize him as a tool and as a means to an end in some ways too. So that's an interesting character arc right there, or an interesting character trait.
Well, I can say that scene between Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali, or Cassius Clay, when Cassius Clay discovers that Malcolm X is thinking of leaving this version of the Nation of Islam, and the look on Cassius Clay's face is devastating. And it's just one small little moment, but it's really well done. And that's a second time that I was profoundly affected by the idea that somebody thinks a person is one thing, and they have based changing their life is based on this idea or ideal. And all of a sudden this person tells you, no, I'm looking at it in a different direction now. It must have been really hard, especially for a 22-year-old kid. He's 22.
Who's being asked to not drink and not, all of this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, oh, by the way, what I've been saying to you for the past however long it's been, I'm not going with that anymore because I'm having complications. And that to me was profound. And so no matter what would have happened in this movie, with those little moments, it would have added up to a great film for me. Here's where I want to go now. Did you notice that, and I thought it was brilliant when I finally noticed it, and it happens throughout the whole entire film, in particular when they're in the hotel room, but it happens quite a bit. Did you notice that Regina King, remember I said you don't necessarily have the fourth wall in a movie? Did you notice that if there was somebody in front of the camera, she left them there and shot around them as if she was behind a character, shooting behind the character? And they were usually blurred. They're usually blurred out. And then there's a couple of times in the hotel room, there is a separation between the bedroom area and the dining area. And it's kind of like this archway, and it's kind of etched out. And she shoots behind that at one point. And I thought to myself, I'm wondering why she's doing so many shots of blurred people. And I'm wondering why she's using so much obscured space. Like, that's odd to me. But then I realized, for me, what it meant was that these people, even though they're as big as Malcolm X and as famous as Sam Cooke, they're still obscured in society's eyes. They're still blurred in society's eyes. Society does not fully see these men for who they are. And I don't know if that was what she meant by that, but it blew me away. Did you notice any of that?
Well, I mean, I think what you're describing is a somewhat standard shot of what you would call an over. So if you've got two people talking, instead of having the camera just kind of floating in space, focusing on person A and then switching to another shot of person B, what you'll do to give the two characters a sense of togetherness is you will shoot person A, and person B will have their back to the camera, will be off to the side, and they'll be closer to the camera. So they're going to be out of focus just because of the depth of field of most film cameras and lenses that they use is going to make it so that if you've got a person who's 6 feet away in focus, the person who's 1 foot away is not going to be in focus. So that's a somewhat standard shot type of a thing. But that doesn't mean that she's not purposefully trying to obscure things and not purposefully trying to. I mean, sometimes you'll see a camera especially during a long dialogue scene. A camera may go behind a character. You may be pointed at a character 6 feet away, and then there's another character in between the camera and that main character, and then it's going behind the person they're talking to. And that can mean all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
All that stuff that you described seems standard to me. But she did things where the person who was obscured was not even in the scene per se. They were an observer of the scene. I can't remember, there's two, I think it's Cassius Clay and Sam Cooke are sitting on the bed talking, and she shoots it from behind Jim Brown and Malcolm X. Don't quote me on the setup, but there is no particular reason why she needs to shoot that scene from behind the two other guys. Just like she doesn't need to. It's not a shot that goes behind the two guys. It's not an all-encompassing 4-person conversation at the time. The scene where I was talking about the split between the bedroom and the dining area. There's no reason. It's not like the camera pans to the side of that and goes in front of it. It's not that. It's literally shot in front of that
partition,
yes. And so it just seems so purposeful, and she does it quite a bit. And then if you ever get a chance to watch a movie again, I think you'll notice what I'm talking about.
That's cool.
Because what you've described, I've seen before. This seemed different. And it was either, I believe everything is purposeful when it comes to art. And I think that true craftsmen do things on purpose. But at the same time, there are, logical reasons why the camera would have to go in front of somebody and be blurred out and so forth and so on. But to actually do it without a purpose doesn't make sense to me. My interpretation might not be what she was going for, but she definitely does that on purpose. And I took something from it. So for me, that's a great thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And I do think that, kind of like we talked about at the beginning of the film, especially a movie that's going to be set in one or maybe two different locations, when you've got a singular room or an extended room of bedroom, kitchenette, dining area, whatever, you have to find different ways to make it visually engaging and visually appealing. And yeah, she definitely did that. It wasn't just like, hey, have them sit on this chair and that chair and then have different people sit in those chairs and then have different conversations. It's definitely not cookie cutter. So I think she did do a good job of keeping us engaged as an audience on what we're supposed to be paying attention to, and then also picking up different things in the periphery, that whether it's how someone reacts to how someone reacts to Malcolm X being super serious on a night that they're supposed to be going out and partying, or how Sam Cooke reacts to Bob Dylan playing on the record player or whatever. She definitely didn't frame out people. She was getting shots of 3, if not 4 people in the shot. And I did notice that, especially during the Sam Cooke, Malcolm X turntable, Bob Dylan scene. So it's a clunky way of describing it, but yes.
Well, if it wasn't purposeful, I totally got what you meant. If it wasn't purposeful and didn't mean something, I am intrigued by the fact that I definitely got something from it and interpreted it a certain way. But it also could just be the thing where we've talked about before, where like when they film sex scenes and the blanket is just purposely covering the woman's breasts so you can't see them. But in real life, it would never happen that way. And you can tell it pulls you out of the scene. It makes it unrealistic. So maybe she was just trying to make you the 5th person in the room. And if you were to move around in a room, you would see the back of this guy's head. And if you were standing too close, he would be a little bit more blurry. It might just be a practical thing that she didn't want for it to always be the illusion of the 4th wall not being there. It made it feel like I am actually watching this, a fly on the wall, if you will, for lack of a better term. So I thought it was great.
That's awesome. So, all right, what do you think about Oscar capabilities, predictions for the performances in this film? Think there's enough there compared to other performances that you've seen so far?
Yes, I do. And I know that Leslie Odom Jr. is getting a lot of praise, and he's on a lot of critics' list. And I will say this about him. First of all, I didn't realize he looked as much like Sam Cooke as he does, because if you go to YouTube, oh my God, I was like, what is happening?
Where are you on the Hamilton spectrum? Like, have you heard any Hamilton? Have you seen anything?
Don't make me.
It's okay.
No, it hurts me. It hurts me.
It's going to be better if you don't know anything about Hamilton and you see this and you still have praise for him.
Yeah, I know enough about it. I have not seen it. I have not seen the film that was released. I don't have access to it. I will eventually come to the Hamilton world. I know I will. I tried to get lottery tickets the last time it came here.
Oh, wow.
I couldn't get them. I wasn't lucky. Now, the truth of the matter is that I didn't try that hard. It was one of those things where it's like somebody's going to Vegas. You're like, put 20 on red, like you give them $20. Hey, if you can get an extra ticket, I'll go. And it never happened. So no, I have no experience with him and Hamilton. So I'm coming at this as an actor who's unknown to me and a performance of somebody who's sort of known to me. I can say this much. He's solid throughout the whole entire movie. His confidence and his security as a human being intrigued me. I mean, I was going to say Uber again. He has immense talent. Sam Cooke did. So the confidence that it would take to do that with that talent, he exudes Leslie Odom Jr. But I will say this, if and when he's nominated for the Oscar, he will be the first person in Oscar history that I know of since I've been watching the Oscars that his Oscar winning moment comes at the very end of the film. And it literally is the last shot. And it is beautiful. I just like, you got to be kidding me. Like, I thought I was done by that point. And I was almost in the back of my head going, why is this guy getting so much praise? He's doing a great job, but what lifts this above and beyond anybody else I've seen this year? That said, I've always been an advocate for somebody who's just a real person should be credited with an Oscar nomination, just like somebody who has a great laugh cry scene or does some kind of great emoting monologue. I think being a real human being is a hard thing to do. Leslie Odom Jr. up to the last moment does that, but that last moment is masterful. And I was like, oh, there it is. Okay, keep your mouth shut, Paul, because be careful of what you wish for because it's coming. And it was profound. And I don't think I turned the movie off until it like stopped itself. Sometimes I'll just shut it off, after I'm done with it, but I couldn't because I was so in the moment. That said, I think all of the actors are superb. Aldis Hodge, we've talked about him, and he holds his own, and that reaction in the beginning to what Beau Bridges says to him is, you can see that man has lived that. Not necessarily Aldis Hodge, but Jim Brown.
You actually see him lose hope. I think that's the key, is that you see him actually, he's held on to hope for a certain amount, even though he's been kicked down, and now he just gets kicked down another time, and he's, it's like you can see him just kind of like his eyes just kind of die, and it's just, it's rough.
And the actors had that experience in life. It. So to separate the two are probably difficult to do, but I saw Jim Brown reacting to that moment. That was an important difference for me. And Eli Goree as Cassius Clay, he brought a different dimension to that character than Will Smith did, than Ali has in real life for me. So the exuberance that you would have to bring to that character without it becoming a caricature or a stereotype is very difficult. And the way that he handles the dialect, the accent, if you will, you cannot not know that's Muhammad Ali. It is Muhammad Ali. He looks so much like him, first of all. And the way that he handles his body and the way that he walks and reacts as if he's a boxer, you would know he was a boxer just by watching him silently. Even if you didn't know this movie, even if you didn't know this character, you would know this guy I think you would know he was a fighter. The way he physicalizes things, he actually pulls his fists up a couple of times, and it's not to fight anybody. It's just who he is as a person. Now he does that with his pomp and circumstance too, because he's Ali and that's what he does. But he seemed like a real person. I thought I was watching a real person who just happens to be somebody famous that I know is somebody famous. I think that's extremely hard to pull off. But I will say this, Kingsley Ben-Adir deserves an Oscar nomination for Best Actor. He has moment after moment after moment in this film that is devastatingly beautiful. When he looks out the window at the end and sees the black guy giving the two white guys whatever he's giving, he thinks the two white guys are following him. The disappointment on his face that somebody is doing something that they shouldn't be doing is impactful. It's just powerful. And once again, he seemed like a real human being. And I think Denzel Washington does in Malcolm X, but Malcolm X, the Spike Lee film, is very stylized, which I love. Don't get me wrong. I love that movie. But this version of Malcolm X Now, he is in a transition, so that would have been difficult to pull off. And instead of being this militant, scary guy, he seems like a genuine human being who's hurt, who cannot get what he needs spiritually, so he's going to find it himself. And instead of coming across as this preachy, pompous, I'm going to Mecca, that's what everybody should do. He doesn't do that. And I don't know if it's written this way or if the actor chose to make it this way. The way that he handles just simple things like that, Kingsley Ben-Adir, is mesmerizing to me. I don't know this actor. I've been obsessed with him for the last 2 days. He's in some kind of Netflix show called OA or something, or QA or something.
It got canceled, which it's a Britt Marling, Zach Batmangley or whatever his name is. I think we've talked about Britt Marling before, but yeah, it's one of those shows that I think had this like really long tail, and it was supposed to be over multiple seasons, and I think they like canceled it after 2 seasons or something. So I watched most of the first episode, and I was like, oh, this is going to be good. And then I found out that it was canceled, and I'm like, nope, not doing it, because it's just going to be frustrating.
See, I'm the opposite. Yeah, see, I'm the opposite. I knew that Carnival was canceled after 2 seasons, but I was in, man. I was in, and I actually felt like it ended fine. But I'm going to check that show out just because of this actor. And I will say this, Anthony Hopkins is on the verge of his umpteenth Oscar nomination for this movie called The Father. And Gary Oldman is on his 3rd or 4th Oscar nomination, possibly for Mank. And so with Kingsley Ben-Adir coming in, you have to take somebody out. And I'm thinking to myself, well, Anthony Hopkins, you better do what you've come to do, because I don't want to take Gary Oldman out, because I thought he was fantastic in Mank. But if I have to take somebody out, I think Gary's got to go. Sorry. They did 2 separate things for me, these 2 actors. They're just, they're 2 entirely different things. But the interesting thing is that they're similar in that Gary Oldman is a character. It's a character study. And of course, Malcolm X is a character study too, but my heart was ripped out by what Kingsley Ben-Adir did. So I think there's possibility. I definitely think there's possibility for Best Picture. I think that the director nominations are so hard this year because there's so many great films out there, and there's so many other people in line for possible nominations that I don't know if she'll get looked at, Regina King, but she made a movie that to me was almost impossible to make as a first-time director. Why would you take a theater piece and try to transpose it into a movie piece? And then I researched her. She's not done live theater. She's actually stated that she's a little afraid of it. That not that she's afraid of it, that the concentration and focus it would take to do a play live is something she can't give herself over to. Those are my words, not hers. But I would venture to say I'm sure she'd be just fine. I'm sure she'd be okay. But to take on 4 characters so well known and a specific night that is imaginary. Obviously, the play is hunkered down in some kind of structure that she could cling on to, but I don't know how she can't see the theater as a challenge and overcome that and get her. Watch, next year she'll win a Tony. Watch, because she'll be profound once she gives herself over to it. But the fact that she can find the concentration. Now, she's been directing a lot with the episodic TV that she's been on over the last couple of years, probably last decade or so. So she knows the world. But it was a lot to take on, and I think it's a crowning achievement. I think she should be extremely proud of herself, regardless of what happens with Oscar nominations or not, because she made one of the best movies of the year.
All right. Well, I am not as good at prognosticating as you are, but I could definitely see Kingsley Ben-Adir getting some kind of attention. And then I didn't know Leslie Odom Jr. was getting buzz or whatever, but that's really cool. But once again, I'm on a different part of the Hamilton spectrum in that I listened to the soundtrack, and then when it came out on like Disney Plus stuff, and I watched it, and it's really good. I mean, you'll definitely have to experience it at some point. But the good part is you're not gonna be tied up in the mania of Hamilton, so it'll be interesting to get your take on Hamilton from a somewhat dispassionate post-mania point of view.
I am a little embarrassed I haven't seen Hamilton.
Why?
Yeah, well, just because that's my world, you know?
But maybe you're not interested. Are you interested in it?
Are you kidding me? I could snort it like it was cocaine. Are you kidding me? What are you talking about? Chop it up and give me a straw. I would eat it. But I will tell you this. I do not like to listen to soundtracks of musicals before I see them. There's only been one that I've done that to. Spring Awakenings. I listened to that soundtrack because there's a song at the end called Purple Summer, which is, I think, the best musical number in a musical I've ever heard to this day. And I got obsessed with that song, and it kind of like led me down a rabbit hole. Now, luckily, a week later, I was in New York and seeing it on Broadway with the original cast in the last weekend that they were performing. The original cast was performing. So it was only like 4 or 5 days from the time I discovered the music to the time I saw the play. But I don't like to hear the music before I see the musical live. So that's why I haven't experienced anything from Hamilton, because I need to. Yeah, and I'm sure I'll become obsessed with it. I'll probably end up with a Hamilton tattoo.
Well, for me, it didn't hurt it one bit. I mean, I had listened to the soundtrack a year before. I came to Hamilton late. You know, Hamilton was back in 2015 or something. But still, I only had first listened to it about a year ago. And Leslie Odom Jr. is amazing in Hamilton. He's also great in this film too. So yeah, any accolades he gets, the more the merrier. So, all right. Well, you can check us out on the web at actorandengineer.com. You can go to facebook.com/actorandengineer. You can tweet us at actorengineer, and you can check us out on YouTube. You just search Actor and Engineer Podcast, and we'll see you next time.